there'd be a little bit for everything, so people looking after sites, developers and so on. Just some of the things that we've learned and might be of use to the community along the way. Prior to 2009, we had the original PM site in a cold fusion static environment there. We had some built-in functionality, we had some news items and things like that that could be added, mail outs and a whole lot of things there. But during the latter part of 2008 and 2009, there was a very strong push from the Prime Minister's office at the time. They'd been over to the US and they'd seen Obama's campaign, and they were very keen to sort of get into this sort of space and start improving what they were doing in terms of outreach on the web and online engagement. So, as a result of that, and in a very short time frame, this site was put together. It was developed by OPC at the time, and it was, I think, launched in around July 2009. It came out there. There was a fair bit of functionality that was put into the site, and there was a lot of incorporation of multimedia elements. We also had a blog, or a flog as we used to call it, because it was sort of a combination blog or forum type thing. So what would happen is there'd be a forum on a topic like climate change. People would come in, add comments, and then after that we'd work that up to have a web chat, and that was using some third-party software from Viacorp. So we were using Viacorp to power all the multimedia components and the web chat components on that site there. And also there was linkage obviously to social media, Twitter and the like, and a lot of focus on video and images. There were hundreds and hundreds of videos that went up there, and images as well. So it was a big step at the time for the department. Being a relatively risk-averse department, taking this step with Drupal was a big change, I guess, for the department. And I guess in another way, a big risk as well in terms of going down with this sort of path. Now, unfortunately, the site didn't quite make it to its 1 year anniversary because something happened on the 24th of June that put an end to that. And as a result of that, we had to make some changes to the site, and you can see there that it was still basically the same structure, the same sort of site that we had for PM&C, but there was some tweaking and some changes there. Some of the elements were removed, some of those engagement elements there were scaled back a little bit there. Now, after the election, there was a big push to redevelop and rebrand the site again in the latter part of 2010. And so during that period up until January 2011, we worked with another company, Reading Room, to redevelop the site. And there were quite a few changes made to it in the look and feel. But there were still similar elements, blog, press office, all of those sort of items in there. And also you can see there were some additions at the time, obviously, for the flooding events, New Zealand earthquakes and things like that. So it was quite an interesting time to launch that site there when all that was happening there. So the department began to work on a task force that was set up to start working on the Chogham site towards the end of 2010, and a team went away and on the Chogham task force produced this site and came up with that one there. That site, Chogham finished up in November last year there, and that was quite a successful site there in terms of, it went through a few iterations, but it was up and running reasonably quickly, and it would have quite a bit of functionality there in terms of integration and engagement with the Chogham task force. Now, during 2011, we found ourselves in a position where there was a machinery of government change, and as a result of that, we inherited responsibility for a whole lot of functions from other departments. And so we made the decision at the time, given our experience with Drupal on the PM site and also with Chogham, Drupal being a very flexible platform, that it would be a good opportunity to redevelop these sites. So social inclusion came across from DIWA, it was a SharePoint site at the time, and National Compact came across from Faxia, it was a WordPress site at the time, and then the Office for the Not-for-Profit was a new site that was incorporated into that. It was a bit of an odd structure. These sit as a Drupal multi-site. They're 3 separate sites at the back end, but they're sort of linked in various ways in terms of the theming and the look and feel and how they come across there. And then the big one that we had to transfer was from environment in 2011. We brought across the arts.gov.au portal, and that was at the time in My Source Matrix. And we started investigating what would be involved in bringing that across, and that was going to cost quite a significant amount of money to bring that across in Matrix. And although I'd previously worked with Matrix at agriculture, there wasn't a lot of skill set to support this, and the cost to support this and get this up and running. We made the call that we'd redevelop that in Drupal to run it on our platform. So that's probably one of our biggest sites in terms of the content and the editing as well. During the latter part of 2011, we continued with a number of smaller sites for the cyber white paper, which very distinctive colours, and we certainly got a lot of feedback and comments about that. And then for particular things, so for the Office for the Arts, we developed a cultural policy website, and more recently the Australian and Asian Century Task Force was set up. The latter 2 sites were set up in-house, so with our team. All of the other sites to that time had been involving external contractors and other parties developing those sites for us. So it was a sign that we're starting to build up a few skills in the team. They're not overly complex sites, these ones, but we're starting to get some of those skill sets building up in the team and starting to get some confidence in developing those sites as well. We've continued down the Drupal path in 2012, recently launching the volunteering video competition for the Office for the Not-for-Profit sector. And there's 2 more sites on the way in terms of COAG. It's been redeveloped in Drupal, and that's in our dev and test environment and should be launched hopefully in the next week or 2. And then OPC have worked for us to bring the Governor-General's site across. So the Governor-General's office will continue to manage their own web environment there, but it's been redeveloped on the Drupal platform so that we can run it there in our environment there. So it'll be interesting at that time because when that site goes live, I mean obviously the head of state and the Prime Minister will both be in Drupal environments. So on top of that, we've also found it quite useful as a platform for doing a lot of internal quick applications up and running. So we had an employee discussion board there as an example, using Drupal forums, pretty much out of the box, minimal styling. But it sort of met our needs in getting something up and running really quickly and meeting most of the needs of the business area. And then things like cafe surveys for our property area and things like that. The other big thing that OPC are working on for us at the moment is redeveloping our intranet for the department in Drupal as well. And so that's progressing quite well at the moment, but that's quite a big site and it's a big step as well in terms of using Drupal for us. So I guess the question is, looking back over the last 3 years, sort of what are the things that we've sort of picked up, what are the things that we've done well, what are the things we've probably learned that we could do better, and what are some of those lessons that have come out of it? I guess from a technical perspective, one of the really good things is how easy it is to transfer Drupal sites. And having previously worked with My Source Matrix and trying to move those sites around, coming to Drupal and working with Drupal where you could put it between your local desktop, dev and test, things like that. It was a much simpler process to get sites up and running most of the time. The setup most of the time is straightforward. The extensibility has been a big factor. I mean, when we need to get new functionality up and running, often it's a case of looking, okay, there's a suitable module, we can go from there. And also having an active community there. And I was just noting off the Drupal.org that there was something like 2,700 code commits on the site. Most of our sites are relatively low traffic, but the scalability of Drupal gives us some flexibility so we can move sites around and change things depending on particular events. And obviously the flexibility being a key thing there, that we've used it for now for intranets, we've used it for forums, for blogs, we've used it right across the spectrum. So it's become like a really good web application tool, not just a CMS as well. I guess there's also been a few negatives that we picked up along the way. We're running on a Microsoft Windows platform, running in IIS, and that presents some challenges, as James would well know in terms of that. We've run into issues with permissions in the Windows system. We've run into issues where modules and things like that have been quite well tested in the Apache environment don't tend to translate as well in IIS or in Windows. So there's been some extra pain in running it in Windows, but you can do it. One of the very early lessons we learnt on when we set up the first PM site was not to mess with the core. Now, it was always tempting when we just wanted to change little things like text and wording and things like that, to go in, hack the core, change that word here and do those little things there. But that was just an issue down the track in terms of as soon as we start updating the sites, you just run into trouble there. So we very quickly cottoned on, that there's some things that we had to do the way we managed it, and that would make it better for us in the long run in terms of maintaining the sites. We started off looking into multi-sites as we started doing more and more sites, and obviously the attraction of them was pretty obvious in terms of having one code base and not having to update across multiple sites all the time. I guess our experience in practice has been that they haven't worked as well as we hoped. We've had issues where things have gone wrong and caused issues on other sites, even though effectively they should be isolated. So we've tended to steer away from that now, and we're basically going primarily with single sites there in their own code base. There's an attraction, I guess, with so many modules out there to go through, and I'll put a module on for that and I'll get a module for that. And certainly with some of the sites that you've seen there, that's become a problem for us in terms of maintaining those modules. Some of those modules are poor quality, some of them are no longer supported, some of them just cause issues in terms of performance and things like that. So I guess we've started to be a bit more strategic and a bit more measured in how we manage the modules, and rather than just going out and grabbing stuff, just being a little bit more careful and a little bit more strategic in the way we do that. There's been some module options for some functionality is not great. I know on the original PM site we had a lot of issues with the newsletter mail out type functionality on there. We'd often end up with issues where mail was sent out twice, where mail wasn't sent, all of those sort of things there. And they could be potential issues between the email server, the web server, a whole lot of things that go wrong. But in the end, we've opted for different solutions to get around that, and we're now using third-party solutions for sort of all those mail-out functions. At times, we've noticed sluggish performance. There's some queries that may, grind the system down and make it perform quite slowly. So some of our setup and some of those things we're going to go back and have a bit of a look at and try and, identify those issues where there's problems. And at the moment, obviously, we're running probably half in terms of Drupal 6 and Drupal 7. I always find it frustrating. I don't know where to find something in Drupal 6 and then go across to the Drupal 7 site and it's like, oh, where's that gone now? And all of those things move around. So hopefully we're moving to a path where we'll move to Drupal 7 for all of the sites over the next 6 to 12 months. But while we're running this dual environment, there are some overheads with that. I guess security has always been a big concern for us, and obviously with the PM's website it's always been a high profile target, and you can see back in 2009, not long after the site was launched, apparently it was hacked because there was a denial of service attack. But that gets the run in the media, unfortunately, in terms of that, even though, as I said, it was primarily just a denial of service attack that happened there. But when it gets into the media, it gets blown out of proportion in that sense. Obviously, the other thing is keeping the core and modules patched and up to date is quite a challenge with so many sites, and that can present some issues in terms of when there's a lot of patches and that coming out. Trying to keep on top of that is always a challenge. I guess in terms of with so many developers here as well, this is probably of some interest to you. I guess we found we do need support from Drupal experts. We've worked to try and increase the skills in the team. Some people have picked it up, and some people are quite good at it now. But there's always been a point where we've needed someone to come in. We've hit an issue where we can't solve internally, and having someone externally who can come in and have a look at that and resolve that issue has been critical for us. What we've also found, we've tried to broaden the base of who we've been using for Drupal. I guess for two reasons: to try and grow the help grow the industry, and also to make sure that we weren't totally reliant on one supplier. And what we found is we've learned some hard lessons from doing that. We found that some companies that we tried, and none of the ones in this room, but they come out and say, yeah, we can do Drupal, we know this, and then when we actually went through the product and looked through what they delivered, they clearly didn't know what they were doing with it, and they really struggled with it, and that's left us with some legacy sites that have some issues there. So I guess we've taken a line now that we're really focusing on people that have that Drupal development skills when we're going out to the marketplace for particular work at the moment. That's been critical for us. It's good to see that there's a lot more companies obviously now supporting Drupal, and that gives us more options and other government departments more options in sourcing support. And it also increases competition and helps with pricing and stuff. We're being squeezed obviously with budgets at the moment. Government panels. There's a clear advantage in getting onto those panels for work. We have a web applications panel, but various departments have other ones. I think Centrelink have a broader one as well in terms of for government. In terms of our procurement procedures, it makes it so much easier if a company's on a panel to source them. I know they're painful to get onto. I know there's a lot of work for companies involved to do that. But in terms of ongoing work and sourcing work, it certainly makes it easy from our perspective, sourcing work from those companies on the panel. The other thing is delivery dates are really important in government. Often they're very unrealistic, particularly around this time of the year, as everyone tries to spend money before that June 30 deadline. But we have run into issues where a minister's launching a particular event or doing some particular thing with the website, and having that website done on time and to a specified standard has become really important. I guess the key thing is, having taken on so many sites, we've been able to move away from being a centralised web team that does publishing to a more decentralised model. So on a lot of our sites now, we have areas that look after their own content or particular parts of their content. So news items, blog items are handled by the Prime Minister's office directly. We only need to get involved when there's issues or when they want to do something out of the ordinary. We couldn't have taken on, with the team that we have, and we only have about 3 or 4 people in our team there, we couldn't have taken on all these other websites without getting rid of some of that publishing overhead. Most of our editors have picked up Drupal really well. We haven't gone through extensive training, and we do provide support when they run into issues, but we haven't done a lot of training with our authors and editors. But most of them picked it up, and I think it gives an indication that it's relatively intuitive for people to pick up with Drupal. And obviously getting those content types right really makes it easy, so you can set up the items that they need and make it really intuitive for users. It really makes it easy for those non-technical users that we have. I guess the things that we still need to nail down and get across. Moving between development, test and production is still a challenge. When we're patching stuff, when we're adding new functionality, that can be a problem. We've worked with James from APC and using Drush and Git and a lot of scripting there to try and improve that process and make it a lot more streamlined, but it's still an overhead in terms of going through that there. And the other thing is long-term archiving of the sites. What we want to do is sites like Choggum and things like that, we want to move them out of that Drupal environment once we've finished actively using them and they become archive sites. And the advantage of doing that is long term. We don't have to patch them, we don't have to worry about keeping functionality up to date on them. We can just retire them as static websites. So we've used a number of tools to do that, but it's not perfect in terms of picking up a lot of that dynamic functionality in sites. I think the other thing now, with a lot more government agencies working on Drupal, there's a chance to really start sharing some of that knowledge, sharing some of that common work that we need. And one of the examples there was the AGLS metadata. Obviously, that's not there for Drupal 7, but I mean, it's obviously a requirement for government agencies to include that. So, I mean, if we can, share that work around, then it makes it more cost effective, I guess, in the long term. Accessibility. Obviously, the more modules we add in, adds issues in terms of accessibility, and that's something we've still got to do some more work on in terms of getting our sites to meet the requirements by December. The other thing that's been important is that the attitude towards open source, particularly in some areas of IT, is not always positive. Now, even though government is now required to consider open source in terms of its IT procurement, there still seems to be some pockets of resistance around the place for various reasons. So it's improving, but it's something that we still need to keep challenging and keep pushing and getting people across. The other thing is, I guess most of the stuff I've done in terms of picking up Drupal has been, getting my copy of the site, playing with it, doing things, breaking it more often probably would be the case. But I guess for some people that doesn't work. Some people don't have that time to sit down and read through the online resourcing and tutorials and things like that. So that would be really great to have some more formalised training options for a lot of our authors and editors and content managers, just so that they can improve their skill sets and also share that knowledge a bit more. So there's some options there to improve that sort of capacity. And obviously it's a growing environment for government. There's a lot of interest in Drupal, and Faxia and DWA and a lot of the other big departments moving down that path. I think of all the main government departments, I think Drupal is now probably the most represented CMS across them all, and happily seeing less and less of SharePoint around the place as well. So, thank you very much.
We'll throw open the floor for questions briefly. Does anyone have a question for Jeff?
Jeff, how many people have you got in your team?
We have a team of 4, and then we're supported by 2 contractors, one who comes in 3 days a week, and then James, who comes in 1 day a fortnight in terms of helping out with maintenance issues there.
So are those 6 people all developers, or do you have different roles?
Not developers as such. Most of the development roles we've outsourced in terms of the work we do. So most of us, a lot of it's publishing role and content management roles there. So, but we're gradually improving skills, and certainly some people are starting to pick up some of that.
What about content creation? Is that done by your team?
Generally not. The problem we have is that we don't have a comms team in our department as such. And that sort of means that our team has sort of taken on a dual role, sort of doing a bit of both, a bit of the content, a bit of the management of the sites as well in terms of the technical setup. So that's been a challenge for us there.
With your decentralised publishing model that you mentioned, how many people are involved in that? So how many sort of external authors and decentralised publishing?
Not too many. Most of them are like 1 or 2 in terms of that. So the Prime Minister's primarily one person.
Yep.
Arts has 3 or 4 people who might do bits and pieces. And then there's other sites that probably have 1 or 2 people, but not a huge content editing community.
And do you have a workflow behind that?
Not only for the art site, particularly because they wanted that in terms of how they were doing stuff. They were very insistent that they wanted to preview all stuff before it went through. And so, yeah, we implemented a workflow on that one, but the other ones don't have a workflow as such in terms of, they basically manage that area of content. But it's quite restricted, so I mean, most of the time it's publishing news items or things like that. So it's not open slather editing across the site.
Did you have clients that wanted that and you advised against it? Is it a wider editing access?
Not as yet, but I guess we didn't have that functionality 2 years ago in terms of we did all the publishing
and controlled it centrally. So it's still sort of gradually that culture's still changing, and we're trying to move to a point where we start doing more of the value add type stuff and less of the publishing, and we put more of that publishing role back to the content owners as such, because we're not the content experts as such, and I guess we'd see our skills better used in sort of adding value to the content, adding functionality and adding technical stuff as opposed to publishing content on the sites.
Can I just jump in and say some of it will change very dramatically in July,
Yes.
August, as the new internet will be a completely distributed model, with representatives across the department publishing their own internet content.
Does that come hand in hand with editorial, brand guidelines and instructions, or even restricted publishing access, or?
Yeah, so they're part of the process that PM&C are going through now, developing governance around who can put stuff on the internet, what the workflows are, who can approve content to be published, what the guidelines and all that kind of stuff are. So that's in process. Some of that is being enforced technically through workflows, like we were asking about before, and some of it is just policy about how we're going to do things.
Yeah. And I think the model that we're going with the intranet is one we're probably going to emulate for our external website when we move that across, and for other sites down the track. But we've sort of been hampered by the fact not having a comms area as such. We haven't had that sort of overarching structure that other departments have in that sense.
Any other questions?
Yeah, you mentioned that you kind of were a bit iffy about the whole multi-site side of things and had some issues there.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what specifically kind of didn't work so well? That side of things?
I think one of the issues we ran into was the versioning system that James helped implement on the scripting and that made it difficult across the sites there when we had them in multi-site. So we've been using Git for versioning and Drush as well in terms of the scripts for pushing stuff between dev, test and prod, and that caused some issues there in terms of that. But we've also had some funny things happen in terms of the multi-sites, and things that shouldn't have impacted ended up impacting and things like that. It's hard to pinpoint an exact thing there, but we found we had lots of issues in terms of that.
Probably the biggest thing that would happen with multi-sites is that if you want to update a module, you have to take all of the sites down while you update that module. And we'd often see things where we would get update scripts out of sync, so we'd run the update.php across 2 out of the 3 multi-sites, and one would miss out and weird stuff would start to happen, or one would have something in its cache table from before an update was applied. Things that, like Jeff said, shouldn't have been impacting across the multi-sites would. Whereas when you have each of your sites running separately with their own separate code bases, it's just one less thing to worry about.
Yeah. And I guess with running pm.gov, we're very nervous about that site, because if that goes down, and we instantly get calls and there's issues raised. So anything that we can do to sort of isolate those sort of sites and keep them on their own, the better it is for us. Even if it's only a slight chance of impacting on it, it avoids those sort of issues and getting picked up on Twitter and things like that.
What are you doing to maintain availability of that site? Do you run like a cache front end on it, or?
No, we're not at the moment. What we are doing is we're having an external recovery site where we're mirroring our environments across. So basically there'll be a site, they'll have an exact replica, and then if something happens to our building or something like that, or there's some attack or whatever, we can switch over to our off-site copy, and that'll have a full backup of the servers in VMware for that.
Yep.
So we're primarily relying on that for that.
Yep.
Performance-wise, we haven't had too many issues. It's only when we've had those denial of service type attacks where that's been an issue, and they've brought everything down pretty much anyway. So,
Am I able to ask what sort of traffic numbers you get?
they're not huge across all the sites. PM and Arts are probably the biggest ones, but we'd be in the small, in terms of sites, the small level of traffic there, so not huge.
Have you considered cloud alternatives for your service?
We did, indeed, with Choggum. One of the concerns was, once again, a denial of service type attack. And prior to Choggum event happening in November, we actually moved the Choggum site across to Uber for their cloud hosting, and they had some DDoS mitigation and a whole lot of other things there, and also they had the capacity to scale up there if the site was starting to get really heavily trafficked. So we're concerned that Choggum might have got really heavily hit, or it might have been subject to an attack, and we didn't want to compromise our network or our environment, so that's when we moved that off to the cloud for the duration of Choggum. And that was the really good thing about Drupal, because we're able to have it up and running on the Uber environment in less than a day, and a few hours actually. The main problem was just configuring firewalls and getting stuff set up so that we could send mail and stuff like that. That was the main complication.
So what about long-term solutions, like keeping it in the cloud?
I think there's still a little bit of resistance to that. I can see some good value in it in terms of being able to scale up, because I mean at times particular news items or particular events might see a real big spike in traffic, and we don't have much capacity to adjust that on the servers and that. But in the cloud environment we could potentially manage that a lot better, and across all the sites, if we had them all there, it certainly makes it easier for moving sites. For issues like moving arts, which has got to go to Department of Regional Australia now, if that was sitting in the cloud, it would potentially just be a matter of handing over the passwords to the incoming department. So that would get around a lot of the issues with machinery of government type transfers. So the sites could sit out in the cloud, whichever department looks after them. It wouldn't be this issue of having to transfer sites and move them around. So that would be the real advantage I'd see in that, because moving arts and moving that across was hideously expensive and time consuming for everyone, and less than a year later we're moving it on to another department. So it's not a really good use of resources, I don't think.
Is there a procedure for both, say, your own code and contributed code in terms of security? I guess, is there kind of criteria or some kind of benchmark to say, yes, we can use this module because it meets these kind of items, or
not a prescribed sort of one. I mean, what we're generally looking for is how other sites it's used on, how popular it is, how the level of support for it in terms of updates, security patching, things like that. But the other thing is we have frequent sort of security testing across the sites as well, for testing those things. But that's something we could look at improving as well, how we handle that.
is the testing something that's handled by another third party?
Yes. Yeah.
Cool. All right, great. Thank you very much, Jeff. Awesome.